You're listening to Country Squire Radio.
Welcome to Country Squire Radio. I'm Bo.
And I'm John David.
JD.
Hey, Bo. Good evening, man.
Man, good evening. How you doing this evening?
You know, I'm pretty good. I mean, you know, we have fun regardless of technology.
Yeah, I'm telling you. We want to say a big thank you to everybody who's tuning in live here for our Country Squire Radio After Hours, which means, you know, we are enjoying a little bit of the whiskey right here.
Cheers, Bo.
Yeah.
And I do want to tell, particularly, we've had several Twitter folks kind of chime in on our tardiness tonight. Pappy Joe and Reborn Pipes, both. I just want you to know that it wasn't me. It wasn't. It was not me tonight.
That's correct.
Which is very unusual that it wasn't. But
no, we're just we
and it's not whiskey induced. Also, I mean, let's make that very clear.
That's accurate. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We haven't had any whiskey related problems yet. So
in just a moment here, we are actually going to bring in our expert for this evening's conversation. One of probably the most recognizable and just really kind of culturally iconic pipe smokers is the character of Sherlock Holmes. He's had a ton of different incarnations through various books and novels, and then of course in modern day film and television, and we really want to do this subject justice. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our discussion with our expert, Bert Wolder. On the line with us, he is one half of the dynamic duo that makes up the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere podcast.
That's right.
And we're really, really thrilled to have... Now, I want to make sure that I'm saying your last name. Is it Bert Wolder?
That's perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
Bert Wolder on the line. Bert,
Wolder.
Thanks for joining us, man.
Well, thank you for putting up with all the technical issues.
It's what we do here. Nothing wrong with it. So, Bert, you know, the great thing is I reached out to you because we like to bring on experts whenever we talk about subject matter in the pipe community that requires experts. And I think Sherlock is definitely one of them. But I was surprised, pleasantly so, to learn that you are a big pipe guy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was a big pipe smoker, you know, really starting when I was in college.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about kind of your history there.
Well, I started working in a pipe shop. I was one of those kids who, in middle school, actually, I was one of those guys who read the Sherlock Holmes stories. And if you're looking for a pipe smoker to emulate, look no further than Sherlock Holmes. And so I decided that when I got old enough, I would start smoking a pipe. And I did when I finished high school and got into college. And then I wound up working at a pipe shop while I was in college. And I got a lot of pipes.
That's fantastic. Tell us about your tobacconist experience. What was that like working in a pipe shop?
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, you know, if you're finishing high school, getting into college, I mean, as you know, to be surrounded by pipes and tobacco, and you guys in the podcast have talked about the pipe culture so frequently, I mean, you are just in it. And I loved retail, and I loved the experience of working with the vendors, and I loved the whole idea of selling pipes and learning about tobacco, and the salesman would come in, and I'd pick up a lot of knowledge. It was a great time.
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
And it was a great time also, you know, without the crazy taxes that you currently have on cigars and tobacco that have just made this thing, you know, sort of a gold-plated pursuit.
That's right. That is right.
So really, you're a Sherlock enthusiast from the get-go. Tell us a little bit, you know, our listeners might not be aware, so tell them a little bit about what is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Well, I Hear of Sherlock, you know, you really have to go back just for a second to around 1934. But basically, you know, the Sherlock Holmes stories have always captured people's imaginations. And back in the 1930s, a newspaper man, a playwright, an author, a traveler, a raconteur, a guy named Christopher Morley, who was very fond of forming clubs, formed a club called the Baker Street Irregulars. And if you've ever read any of the Sherlock Holmes stories, you know that Holmes relied on a group of street urchins that he called the Baker Street Irregulars.
That's right.
Well, Chris Morley and his brothers played at being the Baker Street Irregulars when they were kids. And so when Morley was a newspaper man in New York, he formed a club called the Baker Street Irregulars, all of people who appreciated the Sherlock Holmes stories and would test each other on trivia. You know, there are 56 short stories and 4 novels, and there are a lot of inconsistencies in the stories. And so, you know, who smoked a Trichinopoly cigar, what was found by Dr. Mortimer, you know, at Mr. Baskerville's corpse, all of these kinds of questions they would ask each other. And that group is still going today, called the Baker Street Irregulars.
That's awesome.
That is
And
wonderful.
the internet one of the internet manifestations of this is I Hear of Sherlock, which my friend Scott Monty formed some years ago as sort of a curated web presence. And now we have Flipboard participation, we have Google Hangouts, we have Google Groups, we have the IHearOfSherlock.com website, and we have our own podcast called I Hear of Sherlock, so you can find out more at IHearOfSherlock.com.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Sherlock Holmes, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but really the first real kind of avid fandom, I believe, dates back to Sherlock Holmes. Is that correct?
The first avid fan, well, yeah, probably. I mean, even in the 1920s, Conan Doyle. Of course, many of us, part of the fun of Sherlock Holmes is treating the stories seriously. They present
right.
as being the records of Dr. Watson and the cases of Sherlock Holmes. And so we accept that premise. But for those who accept also the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, Conan Doyle was born in 1859. He died in 1930. But even before he had passed, there was an active group of scholars who were writing essays about the Sherlock Holmes stories, who were pointing out inconsistencies in the stories. I mean, in one case, you'll be told that it was September 16th and it rained. Well, it didn't rain that year in September 16th. So what does that mean? And people just have had an enormous amount of fun. Among other things, Dr. Watson appears to have been married at least twice.
Wow.
And off you go.
Wow.
Do you consider yourself kind of an expert in the inconsistencies? Is that something you know a lot about?
I don't consider myself an expert in anything.
That's a wise answer.
Well played,
right there.
yes, sir.
And while I once may have known about many of these inconsistencies, I now have Google-assisted memory,
That's right.
So I can retrieve very little of the details unbidden. But yeah, no, I've been a fan of this ever since I was a kid.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's wonderful.
So one thing that we've seen over the course of obviously the decades and decades of Sherlock Holmes is this evolution of the character and the various ways that his story has been kind of told, retold, and reimagined and re-envisioned for different audiences. And along that line has kind of come this idea of the evolution of his pipe as well. I mean, one of the things, and JD, remind me, what's kind of the iconic Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, well, a lot of folks, when they think about Sherlock Holmes's pipe, they think of this calabash, right? This very deep bend. But my understanding is that's not really what he smoked. And we might turn to our friend Bert there for a little clarification. But
no, that's exactly right. Holmes never smoked a calabash pipe, and you describe it well. A calabash is a gourd with a meerschaum insert.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the 56 short stories and the 4 novels about Sherlock Holmes, you'll find that pipe smoking shows up in over 22 cases. And Holmes smoked a whole bunch of different pipes, depending on his mood. His favorites included an old black oily clay pipe, a briar, and more rarely a long-stemmed cherrywood pipe that he would smoke when, according to Watson, he felt disputatious. And what he smoked was a black shag
Bo feels
tobacco.
that way quite a bit, yeah.
Disputatious.
Disputatious.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
But no, so he smoked a black shag, right?
Yeah, he did. And the curved pipe started with an actor named William Gillette. When Gillette was the first one to successfully bring Sherlock Holmes to the stage around 1899, 1900. And Gillette found it difficult to say his lines through a straight pipe. So he had a curved, almost Peterson-style pipe because it was easier on the mouth and he could be more articulate. And that's kind of where that curved pipe came from.
Isn't that fascinating?
It really is.
So tell us a little bit. That black shag that he smoked. We did some research on it at our little pipe shop here in Jackson, the Country Squire, and we love Holmes and love fiction and of course love pipes, and so we made our own Baker Street tobacco. But as we researched and kind of regarded this, we were like, well, it sounds like what he smoked was kind of unsmokable. And we would like to sell this stuff, so we kind of had our own twist on it. But kind of tell us a little bit about what Sherlock Holmes smoked.
Well, the 3 major tobaccos that sort of feature in the canon are, and we refer to this body of literature, these 56 short stories, these 4 novels, things like The Hound of the Baskervilles and so on, as the canon. The 3 major tobaccos are the black shag, which today I suppose would be closer to a cigarette tobacco. You know, when I was in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands for a while, Black Shag was usually sold as sort of a roll-up cigarette tobacco.
Yeah.
And the other two tobaccos are Ships. That was what Watson smoked, which we interpret to be a cased rolled Virginia, if you want to think of it like that, kind of an Aaron Moore flake, if you will.
Okay.
And Arcadia. And Arcadia was, it's interesting. Arcadia stems, I don't know if you and your listeners know about James Barrie, the fellow who wrote Peter Pan and his book, My Lady Nicotine. But Barrie, in addition to being the author of Peter Pan, was an associate of Conan Doyle. And in his book, My Lady Nicotine, Barrie saluted the Arcadia mixture, which was his name for Craven, which in those days was manufactured by the same people who made Craven A cigarettes. The Craven Tobacco, I think it was the Craven Tobacco Company on Bond Street in London. And it's that blend, that Craven Tobacco blend, I think that the folks at McClellan have brought back as the Arcadia after doing their own research.
How about that? And Arcadia from McClellan, we sell a bunch of it at the Country Squire.
Yeah.
It fantastic tobacco. Yeah.
It is. It's a fabulous tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Still have a tin somewhere of the old Craven with that cat. They used to have a pink label with a cat on it, and it's a great history.
We know one thing, too, along with kind of the pipe, is we've seen a lot of different unique interpretations of the character. And one thing I do love about Sherlock Holmes is that no matter how many times the story gets retold, it never gets old. Like, there's something so iconic and classic about
Timeless.
about the canon, as you say. But one thing that I think a lot of generations of Sherlock Holmes fans do, they kind of tend to kind of gravitate towards one particular actor. I mean, now that we live kind of in the screen age, everybody kind of has a vision or how they kind of visualize Sherlock Holmes. In fact, a lot of the tweets and questions we were getting, like, at some point y'all should debate who's better, Cumberbatch or Downey. And I'm like, man, that's that's a good conversation, but there's been a lot of these guys that have come before as well. Could you tell us a little bit about how the various actors and the people that have kind of embodied and really kind of brought this character to their various generations?
Sure. Well, Holmes has been on the film since the early days in the silent films. Conan Doyle sold the film rights to Sherlock Holmes to a French silent film company because in those early days of the film business, he had absolutely no idea that movies would turn into an industry. And he later had to buy back the film rights at much more than he'd paid for them so he could do his own productions. And there have been countless actors. Tom Richmond, who is the caricaturist at Mad Magazine, who's also a Sherlock Holmes fan, has recently done a print of his caricatures of his 8 favorite actors playing Sherlock Holmes. And he begins with John Barrymore. Barrymore played Holmes in the silent film days in a picture that was restored a couple of years ago by George Eastman House called Sherlock Holmes. And then the other great Sherlock Holmes, of course, was Basil Rathbone, beginning in 1939 with the 20th Century Fox production of The Hound of the Baskervilles and then The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And Rathbone was paired with Nigel Bruce, who played Watson somewhat comically. And then the other actors over the years have included the great British actor Peter Cushing, who did a version of The Hound of the Baskervilles in 1959. Michael Caine, who did a comic turn as
the
Sherlock
Goofy.
Holmes in Without a Clue. Christopher Plummer, the great actor who played Holmes in Murder by Decree. Robert Stephens, who played it in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. Jeremy Brett, who for a whole generation became Sherlock Holmes in the 1980s on PBS. Robert Downey, whom you mentioned. And of course, today, Benedict Cumberbatch. But also Raymond Massey in the 1930s played Holmes. And each one had a different pipe, and they were very distinctive pipes. In the 20th century Fox productions, Rathbone smoked basically a 3/4 black sandblasted Dunhill, I think, and then in the Universal pictures smoked a Peterson very, very famously, and so on and so forth.
Now, Basil, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but would you say that Basil's kind of the one that, if you look at kind of the fandom, kind of as a whole and not just from a generational standpoint, isn't Basil kind of seen as the most iconic, maybe the Christopher Reeves, if you will, of Sherlock Holmes?
To a certain generation. The interesting thing about Rathbone is you have to remember these stories began in 1887.
Right.
The first story was published in 1887. The second novel, Sign of Four, was published in 1890. And then after that, they became popular in short story form. And then Hound of the Baskervilles was published in the early part of the 20th century. So as the films came out, they always showed Holmes in contemporary dress because Holmes was thought to be a contemporary character. It wasn't until Rathbone in 1939 that the first Holmes film was made, attempting to recreate that Victorian era. And so you had Holmes in those two pictures with the deerstalker cap and,
Right.
and the Inverness cape. And then, of course, in the 1940s, those great Universal pictures with Holmes in the middle of World War II were updated again. But yeah, Rathbone is pretty iconic, but also Jeremy Brett and has just excited a whole generation with his portrayal of Holmes on television, and now Benedict Cumberbatch.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is really, really like niche, and I'm just now remembering this. In the late 90s, there was actually a cartoon show called Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd.
Right.
What was
right.
it? What century was it? The 27th century?
26, 27, something
somewhere
like that.
in there.
Right.
And I remember because like it came. I don't even think it lasted maybe 2 seasons. But I remember it came on, and oh man, I'll just go ahead. I'm gonna embarrass myself, but I'm gonna say this anyway. I was doing madrigals, which it's kind of a choral performance where you actually do Christmas music.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you take Dickens characters and you kind of embody them, and you kind of put on this little whole thing, this whole world and whatnot. And I really wanted to be a Sherlock Holmes character because of that cartoon show. Yeah, and I can't remember. I think it was like Inspector somebody. I can't remember even what the character's name was, but basically...
Lestrade. I think he also had an Inspector Lestrade.
That might have been it. Yeah. And basically, I basically, you know, for all intents and purposes, it was Sherlock Holmes, honestly. Kind of made...
Well, Holmes is all, Holmes just keeps going and going and going. There have been cartoon strips, there are comic books now, there are graphic novels. It's just unbelievable. Every medium he's touched. Radio, the BBC and many other folks have put out scads of radio productions of the Holmes stories. It's just unstoppable.
Now, the most recent incarnation, this BBC production, for the longest time I actually kind of rejected it because everybody really, really wanted me to watch it, and I just kind of like, all right, if everybody thinks it's that good, it can't be that good. And then the other thing was I found out, early on he doesn't smoke a pipe. And I'm like, how is it Sherlock Holmes if he doesn't have the pipe? And of course, the idea is that he's on the nicotine patch. What's kind of, I know that there's like this show is so popular, but there's a lot of kind of tweaks and changes they've made to the iconic Holmes. What's kind of the feel there within the community?
I think the community of not to cast any aspersions on the CBS series Elementary, but I think the community in general loves the BBC Benedict Cumberbatch series, and I think politely I would say admires the Elementary series less. But you have to understand that the BBC series with Benedict Cumberbatch is done by two guys, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat. And Moffat also has been a showrunner for Doctor Who. He's one of the reasons why Doctor Who has been such a great resurgence. And both of them are dedicated Holmesians or Sherlockians. They love the character. And the magic around what they've done is they've made Holmes contemporary. You have to think about it. In 1890, when you were reading these stories, you were reading about Holmes as if you were reading, if you're there in London reading these stories, you're reading a story as if it was really happening in your city.
Yeah.
And they've updated in their update of the character. They've recreated that magic. They've made him contemporary. They've made London a character.
Yeah, they really have.
The stories, and they've adapted his idiosyncrasies very effectively. And they're certainly helped by having some first-rate actors in Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah. What do you think of? Because I love, despite my my initial kind of hesitation to getting involved in the show, I'm now crazy addicted. It's really, really good. But I'm curious, what do you think about kind of their interpretation of the Moriarty character?
Well, you touch on an interesting subject there. A lot of people in the so-called Sherlockian community are not terribly pleased by the Moriarty character.
Yeah.
I happen to deeply admire what they've done because Moriarty, after all, in the original stories, was the Napoleon of crime.
Right.
Holmes refers to him as the source of all that is evil.
Right.
And Moffat and Gatiss have taken that quite literally, and backed up by a brilliant actor. They've created a definitely creepy, menacing, completely evil, and surprising character. And so I think it's a great achievement. But it's for some people it's a little over the top.
Yeah, it's funny because on the one hand, I really love that character. And on the other hand, I don't like thinking that that's Moriarty. Like it just doesn't match up. And I mean, part of it too is it's kind of the what is it, the inspire becoming the inspired, or vice versa, because it's a very Joker-esque character. And if you look
it
at
is, and I think that's a very good way to put it, a Joker-esque character. I mean, the original Moriarty was a professor of mathematics who'd written a paper about the dynamics of the asteroid, and so the suggestion was, he was applying his great brain, his mathematical principles to something as nefarious as crime. Now, today, with computers and algorithms and everything that goes into our modern life, it's not really logical to have a professor of mathematics as a Napoleon of crime. So they've made this Moriarty, more than a little psychopathic. And you could argue with the decision, but it's really very effective.
It's compelling. Yeah.
It is. Have you been able to watch it, John?
I have not. I wanted to ask though, Bert. I mean, is this over the years with all the different renditions post canon? I mean, what has been the most frustrating thing for you as far as something that's come out that just you feel like hasn't fit the universe?
Well,
or do you just like it all?
This is the kind of pursuit that attracts, and pipe smoking in a way too, can be a kind of pursuit that attracts collectors. And in fact, it wasn't until I began communicating with you folks that I got my pipes out again, and now I've started taking a puff on my pipe again. And I'm surrounded, I'm realizing how many pipes I acquired. But there are people who become very wrapped up in it. And so some of the people who are involved in the Sherlockian community are accumulators. They do acquire everything. I mean, a matchbook with Sherlock Holmes on it, a block of soap that's carved in the shape of Sherlock Holmes, a product that's got the word Sherlock on it. They want to buy it. And so there are people who love everything. I mean, I do enjoy. It's very hard for me to call to mind something that I haven't much cared for. I must say I haven't much cared for the CBS series Elementary.
Right.
I think as long as the portrayal of Holmes conforms to certain realities. I mean, Holmes, after all, is a great hero. And these stories of Holmes, the Hound of the Baskervilles, the Sign of Four, finding the great Agra treasure, his adventures, his conflicts with Moriarty, he is a hero. And I think as long as Holmes is presented as brilliant and perceptive and heroic, that any rendition is going to work. It's the rendition that present him as an addled drug user, as a misanthrope, as an unpleasant failure in one way or another, that really don't ring true because it's not true to the character.
Right. That's one thing. I'm a big comic book and superhero geek myself, and one thing I like to tell a lot of my fellow geeks on the internet and abroad is that whenever new interpretations, be it a new movie or a new television show comes out, we can't hold so precious to one particular interpretation of the character. But as long as they remain true to kind of the spirit of what that character is, there's just some things that can't change. You can't make Superman evil. You can't make you can't make Spider-Man a capitalist. You like this, or Daddy Warbucks or something like that. You can't, there has to be this element. Spider-Man always has to be kind of the poor kid, and Superman always has to be the the Boy Scout. As long as those things are true, put them in whatever setting. You can have changes in their life, have changes in their relationship. But the reason why we gravitate to these characters, I think it's so true, is because they are heroic. There's an element there that we really long to see in the real world, and I think Sherlock Holmes definitely embodies that.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and that's one of the reasons why these characters keep coming back, why every generation discovers Tarzan, why every generation somebody takes a stab at the Lone Ranger, or they take a stab at Robin Hood, or pirates, pirates come back. It's one of the reasons why these things sort of keep coming back, and in every generation there's been another stab at Sherlock Holmes, which is great.
Well, I've got to ask you, over the course of the several different incarnations, what do you kind of consider to be your one favorite if you had to name it?
My one favorite. Well, I would suppose it's.
And you do have
You
to
know,
name
you tend to feel most fond, I think, about the people that you encounter when you're younger. And so I think, when I was younger, I encountered all the Rathbone pictures,
Sure.
and the beauty about Basil Rathbone was he looked so much. The original illustrator of the Holmes stories was a fellow named Sidney Paget, and Paget drew Holmes using the model of his brother Walter.
Mm-hmm.
His brother was also an illustrator. So Sherlock Holmes in those early illustrations happens to look like Sidney Paget's brother Walter. But Basil Rathbone, and then an actor in the 1930s in Britain named Arthur Wantner, also greatly resembled those Sidney Paget drawings. And so I suppose if the boat was sailing and I had to put one Holmes in the boat, it would probably, and I was looking for movies, it would probably be Basil Rathbone.
The great thing too, and some of our younger listeners might be listening and hearing that name Basil and kind of associating it with Sherlock Holmes.
It's fantastic.
And one of the reasons is because of the great mouse detective, which
Basil of Baker Street.
That's right, Basil of Baker. And I think wasn't the Watson character named Nigel as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's right. So there was kind of a nod to these two people who kind
to
of
Nigel Bruce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually, I hate to say it, but I think maybe the Great Mouse Detective was my first
encounter with the Holmes universe.
Yeah.
Oh, the Great Mouse Detective was terrific.
And it's a beautiful movie. Yeah.
You remember Ratigan? The Moriarty character, and of course the fellow who voiced Ratigan was Vincent Price.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Remember?
Yeah, I completely forgot about that, but that was definitely Vincent Price.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great little film. But yeah, so one other question too. At the Country Squire, there is also the Baker Street blend. It's something that you see in a lot of different tobacconists. I mean, it seems like if you go to your pipe shop, you're going to find a lot of different people trying to make some sort of, if it's not Baker Street, maybe it's just, Holmes or some sort of Holmes-inspired blends. From both of you guys, as kind of y'all's experience as tobacconists, what really is kind of the mindset there? What do you think are kind of some common threads that you see in different people's interpretation of a Sherlock homage, if you will?
Well, I think if, I'll just throw an idea out there and then turn it over. But, I think if you make a list of these things, Pickwick, Dickens, Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street, all of these are going to be your basic English Latakia-based blends with some degree of Virginia Cavendish and Perique tossed in there. And they're things like, the old Balkan Sobrani, the Arcadia that McClellan are producing. And also on the Watson side, ships. These, that was usually referred to a cased, not really a case, but a pressed Virginia that developed a tremendous sweetness, pressed cake Virginia, because the Navy sailors, would take it on board the boat and it would stay, because of the process, it would stay unspoiled for a long period of time. So I think those two tobaccos tend to be very Englishy, but clearly the Latakia-based Perique kind of Baker Street blend is what folks are doing there when they think about England, I think.
Yeah. I would tend to agree. I mean, I think it kind of evokes not just Latakia and English blends, but very, very robust, stout. You even have images of Sherlock smoking the dottle from the day before and all this kind of stuff. I mean, just stuff that is gonna perhaps grow a little hair on your chest. And so, I just tend to think of more strength and robustness. And again, as you said, we in our Baker Street rendition just dumped a mess of Latakia and matched it with Perique in equal measure. And you just have a lot of strength with the Virginias that combine there. It's got quite a bit of punch, and it's a good nerve pill.
All right, so last question: do you think we're ever going to get a chance to see Cumberbatch rocking a pipe?
No, I think that in making him contemporary, it would be hard to make, at least in Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat's London, pipe smoking contemporary, and they seem to be very fond. There's one instance in the Sherlock Holmes stories where Holmes says to Watson, "Now I've really got to think about this. This is really a three-pipe problem, so I pray do not disturb me for 50 minutes. Now, that means it took Holmes somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes to smoke a pipe.
For a bowl.
So Moffat and Gatiss are very happy tasking Cumberbatch with the 3 patch problem. Instead of the 5 problem.
Well, all right. So it's definitely Divine by Culture. London listeners, that's on you. Y'all got to get out there and represent the pipe out in the streets.
That's right. Because I mean, here in the States, so we're very modern.
Well, good deal. Well, Bert, man, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us. Once again, the podcast is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's IHearOfSherlockEverywhere.com.
No, it's IHearOfSherlock.com, and you can find us on iTunes. And we've just done our 67th episode. We do an episode a month, and all are welcome.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Bert. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bert.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your patience.
All right, man. We really appreciate Bert for joining us. What a great interview.
That was fantastic. Yeah, I had a really good time, and I learned a lot too. Not as familiar with kind of the Holmes tradition and universe, the canon there that he discussed. That was enlightening.
The great thing is that Holmes is such a huge character and really kind of almost like a primordial character for so many other great detective-esque characters.
That's right.
I'm sure we're going to get so many different emails with personal stories about the character, and I guarantee we'll end up revisiting the topic at some point.
Yeah, it's great.
Excellent stuff.
Your thoughts, your comments, listener feedback.
Listener feedback this week. We got some great listener feedback.
This our first feedback comes from R Warren 23 on iTunes. He says, "Perfect blend. This podcast, like a good tobacco blend, has a little of everything to bring out the overall complex and rich experience. There is a lot of basic pipe talk for new pipe smokers, but a sophisticated level of nuts and bolts information for the experienced smoker. Add to the aromatic casing of humor, religion, superheroes, small talk, and general discourse to make it a well-rounded podcast that is much more than just a technical look at pipe culture. Binded together, this podcast is fun, informative, and friendly all at once. It really is reminiscent of the conversation you would have engaging in a smoking lounge at a good tobacco store. I feel these guys are friends, not just hosts." Man, what a great tribute. Yeah.
That is one of my favorite reviews that we've got. Like, it is so beautiful. Well written.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We've made so many good friends through this, and we consider it quite the same.
Also got one from Simon T. Bailey, who writes, "Great show. This is entertaining and informative podcast inspired by a great pipe shop. Keep up the good work, guys."
If this is Simon Bailey that I went to college with that lives in my neighborhood that is a local attorney, come have a beer with me.
All right. Simon, you've been invited.
And the gauntlet has been thrown, Simon.
Well, that's awesome. This was, again, kind of a crazy day, kind of a crazy episode, given we had a lot of technical difficulties. It'll be interesting because I'm not sure what the final product is going to look like as I splice everything together.
I was about to say, I know a good splicer that can splice some things quite well.
It'll be some fun editing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, man, JD, normally I say let's go have a day, but it's let's go get some sleep.
Cheers, man.
Hey, cheers. There we go.